welcome to A Lil Tea Time with me, Jarek, aka Jarius D. And in part 2 of my interview with Miss Levette Fuller, we will be discussing her ideas on how we can fix the crime rate here in the city. Miss Fuller, we are excited to have you here today talking about your campaign. We're going to dive back into some more questions just to continue to get a feel for you for why you are running for mayor. So the next question, what dynamic do you think has been created in the city where we see a lot of crime and negativity?
Well, I think some of it's our mindset. We're very territorial, and that's from a scarcity mindset. What I see a lot of, and it doesn't matter if you're in politics, if it's the arts, there's always kind of this kind of thinking of, well, if you're doing it, well, I can't do that too. Like, why are you doing that? So-and-so is doing that. Like, there's plenty to go around, and we could be sharing resources. Mm-hmm. And I think there's one area where I don't see that, but we'll talk about that later because it's completely off. The scarcity mindset causes us to look at what we don't have instead of celebrating what we do have. Mm-hmm. And when we keep looking to make something new happen, we keep going away from the core. So where we see something that's old that we don't want to take care of, we end up going to where there's a new place that we can build something else because that's easy. We turn our back on stuff. Mm-hmm. And when people get their backs turned, when our backs are turned to people, it's like we've forgotten about them and we're saying that they don't matter. You live in houses that don't matter, in neighborhoods that don't matter, and that's wrong. So the first thing is blight, letting neighborhoods kind of fall apart and fall into disrepair and forgetting about the people that are there and just saying, well, you should just move. I would rather see us repair areas because everyone deserves a good neighborhood. Mm-hmm. All neighborhoods deserve to be safe. So one of the first things I see as a dynamic is just not having enough sense of care for our neighbors that aren't in front of us right then. It's easy for us to look out for what's right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times certain issues don't seem to occur to us until it's happening in our front yard. But that same thing was happening on repeat down the street. Mm-hmm. And it's partially happening there because we've given permission for it to happen by letting those neighborhoods deteriorate without us going back and saying, hey, we need to put in sidewalks. We need to improve these streets. We need to make sure the water and sewer here is sanitary so that people have clean drinking water, so that people have safe sewers that aren't like causing issues within the neighborhood. Yes. We need to make sure that we don't have a bunch of boarded up properties that are causing problems and giving people a place to hide. And frankly, if someone's hiding out in an abandoned house, that's someone that we need to check on that needs our help. Mm-hmm. Instead, we have kind of sat back and said, oh, well, that's difficult, or, oh, that's a dangerous area. We just don't go over there. And it gives bad things permission. It gives bad things permission to take root. And the people who are there feel like they've been given up on. And then they stop communicating to the police. Mm-hmm. They stop going and speaking to their neighbors. They give up on their neighborhood schools. They give up hope. And so more than just any specific thing that's kind of given us like, oh, we just aren't arresting enough people, oh, we don't have enough jobs. The first thing really is the mindset. Mm-hmm. Do my neighbors matter to me, and who are those neighbors? And if we can change our mindset, we can start looking out for people in different ways, and we're less discouraged because we have each other to lean on. And when things get rough, we have someone to lean on that's right there with us to help make things better. And when people have hope, the other things don't run from the light. They'll just run from the light. And I think that it doesn't matter what spiritual philosophy you're from. At the root of each of them is caring for your neighbors, treating people the way you want to be treated, and looking out for vulnerable people. And we can't leave people vulnerable. We can't leave people in vulnerable situations. And we can't think the only answer is just to remove them from it. We have to repair. And if we start repairing our neighborhoods, some of that crime that's trying to take root or has taken root it'll have to go away.
Okay, I like how you just answered that. And we're going to speak to some of that later because I have more questions that relate to that.
Okay.
Moving on to this particular issue, we spoke on it a little while ago, but I'm going to re-elaborate on it. What is mixed income and mixed accessibility?
Okay, so mixed income is literally having neighborhoods that serve more than just one class of people. So a lot in Shreveport, a perfect example of a mixed income neighborhood, or kind of perfect, is Highland. Mm-hmm. You've got a mix of apartments, you've got single family homes that are smaller, and then you have some single family homes that are huge. So there's somewhere for everyone to try to live together, and it's part of what makes the neighborhood interesting. It used to be that neighborhoods were done that way historically so that people before cars, like to some degree, this really is before cars. Like, well, the people who work for the big house need to live close by in a small house. That's literally what was going on. But by keeping that dynamic in play, we've been able to build up a vibrant neighborhood on a grid that's very urban. And it's meant to also be mixed use, which is the other part that you were talking to. So the mixed use piece is having amenities for the neighborhood nearby so that it's not just residential. So we used to build that way historically. And if you look at big cities like New Orleans, a little bit, but not much. There are parts of New Orleans that are very much that. But most of New York is this way. What happens is when you live in a city block, you walk out onto the city block, downstairs you might have retail, you might have a little bit of office space, and then you'll have like housing, right? What that means is I can go downstairs, I can walk down the block, and I can go have a cup of coffee. I can go downstairs, I can walk down the block and go to the grocery store. I can walk 2 blocks and be at my brunch spot to meet my girlfriends. That's mixed use. Now, it doesn't always mean that you're going to live in an apartment above a place, but that does help. But it could be that you live in a house that's 1 block from all of these amenities on the main street. And what it can mean for young people is, hey, Mom, I'm going to go down to the ice cream shop to meet up with JoJo and them. And Mom is fine with it because you're literally like walking or skateboarding or biking 2 blocks. Mm-hmm. And you've got and Mom can also say, hey, and on your way back, pick up a stick of butter and some eggs from the store, because we're zoned for that. Now, that might sound natural, like, oh, that's no problem. Just walking down the store is not a big deal. But a lot of neighborhoods are zoned to only be residential. And a lot of it makes it where everything else outside of where you live, you have to drive to. So the cul-de-sac neighborhoods that we have, you can't have stores in front except for Provenance out on Southern Loop. So what happens is you got to get in your car, drive up the street, drive to another street, and then go to the nearest Walgreens or to the nearest grocery store. But what's ideal in an area where you have more walkability is that mixed use to where things are closer to you that serve the neighborhood, but you have to change the zoning to make that happen. And then you start to see an economic benefit because you don't just have residential property tax, you also have the retail taxes, the sales tax.
Okay, that's a great segue into this next question. What are we seeing happening in neighborhoods where residents who own businesses are not getting resources to help fix the areas they work in?
I think what's happening is because we've kind of trended away from the core neighborhoods, and this idea of mixed use has kind of taken on recently in the core. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that people need incentives maybe to start to come back into the core. So if you're on Line Avenue, it's not a problem. Like, think about like where Brookshire's is on Line Avenue at Piermont. That's not necessarily a mixed use. It's kind of an urban. It's a similar thing because you do have some housing, but it's not very walkable. But everything is very nice because it's an area that has a lot of money. But now, if we go to the other side of I-49 on Hollywood, like drive up Piermont to Hollywood, you have some little old stores that are all boarded up now. And what you need is a reason to get into those spaces. Sometimes the problem is compliance with new codes. So, like, if you had an old corner store that's been closed up for like the last 10 years and it's just boarded up, like literally like right on Hollywood right now, you've got houses that are nearby and people used to just walk over to the corner store. Well, a lot of what closed those little stores down was the bigger supermarkets coming in down the street and they couldn't compete. But the return to making those work in part would be, are they ADA compliant? Like, can people with disabilities get a wheelchair into the store? Are the bathrooms big enough? Are the aisles big enough? There's a lot of different things that go into building now that those that didn't go in when those things were first built. We have to figure out how to get those spaces into usability so that someone, or viability, so that someone can come in and say, okay, we want to put something here that serves the neighborhood. We want to fix this up, and it's going to be an improvement, and it's going to give people access to what they need.
Okay. So what would you say would be some incentives we could give to?
Okay, so I would say parking. So right now we have these parking minimums, parking maximums. So if your store is going to service X amount of people at a time, or let's make it a restaurant. Let's say you want to have like a little cafe. You're going to turn this old grocery, old corner store into a little po' boy shop. Or I'm trying to think of something that would be fun. Like, I have a friend that does African food. What if my friend Nima wanted to put in her little African restaurant? Well, if she's going to have more than 20 people in there, then she has to have X amount of parking spaces because that's the requirement. Well, it's like, well, now I'm like, the space is perfect, but I can't open because I don't have enough parking for the parking requirement. One incentive would be removing that requirement for the parking. That'd be like the easiest thing you could do is just say, I'm going to get rid of that parking requirement and now you can open up, and people just have to carpool or take a lift in order to come to the little African cafe, but now that building is going to be able to open for business.
Okay. I like how you just perfectly outlined how we can get those type of incentives to businesses who need it.
And there are things that could get more complex than that, but that's like a really easy one that could be fixed. Like, I've heard that one come up a lot. Like, there's someone that has a cute little bakery and they would love to make it a cafe and bakery and be able to expand their menu, but because they can't put the tables in. They can't put the tables in to seat more people because they don't have enough parking. But they're in an area where people can just park on the street. We're stopping businesses from being able to open that aren't asking us for anything except to get rid of that parking requirement.
Okay. Well, you guys, we'll be right back with Miss Levette Fuller, care manager of Shreveport, Louisiana, on A Lil Tea Time.